Deep within the archives of our own history, there are stories that have been locked away, not with chains and keys, but with something far more powerful, ink and interpretation. We are told that history is written by the victors, but what if it's also rewritten by those who came later? What if the stories we hold as sacred, the foundations of Western civilization, are missing half of their authors? Hello and welcome back to Secret Archives. In this video, we are opening a file that has been sealed for nearly 2,000 years. It's the story of the women who were at the very heart of the Christian movement, and how the church itself systematically erased them from the narrative. They were there from the very beginning, not as quiet followers, not as helpers in the background. They were leaders. They preached. They taught theology. They led house churches, which were the backbone of the early faith. One was even given the title of apostle, the highest rank, a leader sent with the authority of Christ himself. But as the church grew from a small persecuted movement into a powerful global institution, it also grew more rigid, more hierarchical, and more patriarchal. So what did this new powerful church do with all those women in charge? It erased them. This wasn't a clumsy accident. It was a slow, deliberate cover-up, a rewriting of history that happened in plain sight. And the evidence, the proof of this erasure, is right here in the pages of the Bible itself. You just need to know where to look. Our first and most explosive piece of evidence is a woman named Junia, and her story is the key that unlocks this entire hidden history. Let's break this down, because every word here is critical. The Apostle Paul, the most influential figure in early Christianity after Jesus, is writing a letter to the church in Rome. He's sending greetings to people he knows and respects. He mentions two people, Andronicus and Junia. He says they are outstanding among the apostles. Let's be very clear about what the word apostle meant. It didn't mean just a fan or a follower. An apostle was someone sent out with divine authority. They were the generals, the founders, the highest level of leadership in the early movement. Paul was an apostle. Peter was an apostle. This was the most prestigious title you could have. And Paul says Junia is outstanding among them. For the first 1,000 years of church history, nobody questioned this. Early church fathers, respected theologians like John Chrysostom, who lived in the 4th century, read this verse and understood it perfectly. He wrote, and I quote, "Oh, how great is the devotion of this woman, that she should be counted worthy of the title of apostle." He saw it. It was clear. Junia was a woman, and she was an apostle. So what happened? As the centuries passed, the church structure changed. An all-male priesthood became the absolute rule. The idea of a woman holding the highest office, the title of apostle, became inconvenient. It became impossible. It didn't fit the new narrative. So, scribes and translators started to make a tiny, almost unnoticeable change. In the original Greek, her name is Junia, a very common Roman name for a woman. But later commentators and scribes began to argue that it must be a mistake. They claimed the name was actually Junias, a male name. There's just one problem. The name Junias doesn't exist. It has never been found in any ancient Greek or Roman record. They invented a man to erase a woman. For centuries, this change stuck. In many popular Bible translations, right up until the late 20th century, you will find Paul greeting Andronicus and Junias, a man. The woman who was outstanding among the apostles had vanished, replaced by a fictional man because her very existence threatened the patriarchal order. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a documented fact of textual history. They tried to turn an apostle into a man, and for a very long time, they succeeded. But Junia is just the beginning. Once you see her, you start to see the others. Let's turn the page back, just a few verses in the same chapter, Romans 16. Here, Paul introduces another woman, and her role is just as explosive. Any help she may need from you, for she has been the benefactor of many people, including me. Phoebe, a deacon. That sounds simple enough, but the word Paul uses here for deacon is diakonos. It's a powerful word. It means a minister, a leader, an official agent. And it's the exact same word Paul uses to describe himself and other male leaders of the church. But for centuries, translators treated this word differently depending on who it was describing. When it was a man, diakonos was translated as minister or deacon. But when it was Phoebe, it was often translated as servant or helper. See the pattern? A title of official leadership for a man becomes a role of humble assistance for a woman. But Paul gives us another clue about Phoebe's importance. He calls her a prostates. This Greek word is even more powerful. It means a patron. a protector, a leader, someone who stands in front. In a Roman context, a prostitute was a wealthy patron who had legal and social authority over their clients. Phoebe wasn't just a helper. She was a person of significant means and authority. She was the patron of the church in Cenchreae and even of the Apostle Paul himself. She was likely the person who carried this very letter to Rome, and as the carrier, would have been responsible for reading it aloud and explaining its theology to the Roman Church. Phoebe was a church leader, a minister, and a theological authority. But for centuries, she was demoted in our Bibles to a mere helper. The list goes on. Let's go to the book of Acts. We meet a husband and wife team, Priscilla and Aquila. They are missionaries and church planters alongside Paul. In the 6 times they are mentioned in the Bible, Priscilla's name is listed first 4 times. In the patriarchal culture of the ancient world, this was highly unusual. Listing the woman's name first suggested that she was the more prominent of the two, and their story gets even more interesting. In Acts chapter 18, they meet a brilliant and charismatic preacher named Apollos. The text says Apollos was a great speaker and knew the scriptures inside and out, but his understanding of the faith was incomplete. And what happens next? The Bible says, when Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they invited him to their home and explained to him the way of God more adequately. Let's pause on that. Priscilla, a woman, took a learned man aside and corrected his theology. She taught him. This directly contradicts later church teachings that forbid women from teaching men. But here it is, preserved in the text like a fossil, a remnant of an earlier time when women were respected as theological teachers. And perhaps the most famous case of all is Mary Magdalene. For centuries, the church painted her as a repentant prostitute, a sinful woman redeemed by Jesus. This image is powerful, and it's everywhere in Western art and culture, but it's completely false. Nowhere in the Bible is Mary Magdalene identified as a prostitute, not once. This was a myth, created in the 6th century when Pope Gregory the Great gave a sermon where he blended together several different women from the Gospels, Mary Magdalene, Mary of Bethany, and an unnamed sinful woman into one composite character. Why would he do this? Why create this myth? Because by rebranding Mary Magdalene, you diminish her true role. And her true role was perhaps the most important of all. In all 4 Gospels, he was the first person to witness the resurrected Jesus, Mary Magdalene. And what does Jesus do? He commissions her. He tells her, to Judy, "Go and tell my brothers." She is the first person sent to proclaim the central message of Christianity. Because of this, early church writers gave her a special title, Apostola Apostolorum, the apostle to the apostles. The first Christian preacher was a woman. Her first audience was the male leadership, but the later church found it more comfortable to remember her as a saved sinner than as the first apostle. Her authority was buried under a mountain of shame that was never hers to begin with. Junia, the apostle, turned into a man. Phoebe, the minister and patron, demoted to a helper. Priscilla, the teacher whose role was minimized. Mary Magdalene, the apostle to the apostles, rebranded as a prostitute. You see the pattern. This isn't about 1 or 2 isolated verses. This is a systematic downgrading, a deliberate act of historical revisionism. So why did it happen? The early church was a house church movement. It was decentralized, charismatic, and diverse. Leadership was based on spiritual gifts, not gender. In the intimate setting of a home, women naturally held positions of authority as patrons and teachers. But in the 4th century, everything changed. Christianity went from being a persecuted faith to being the official religion of the Roman Empire. The church absorbed the structure of the empire it once resisted. It became institutional, hierarchical, and public. And the Roman Empire was deeply patriarchal. Public life was for men. So, the church adopted this model. A formal all-male priesthood replaced the fluid, gift-based leadership of the house churches. In this new structure, the stories of women leaders became a problem. They were an inconvenient truth. They didn't fit the new rules. So, over centuries, through subtle shifts in translation, commentary, and tradition, their roles were minimized, their titles were softened, and their stories were rewritten. The women weren't thrown out of the book. They were just edited, pushed to the margins. Their voices faded into whispers. Recovering this history isn't about attacking faith. It's about seeking the truth. It's about restoring a more complete and accurate picture of the past. The archives of our scriptures show us that the foundation of the Christian faith was built by both men and women, side by side. The story they didn't want you to know is that leadership, authority, and devotion were never exclusively male. The erasure of these women was a choice made by later generations to consolidate power. But the evidence remains, hidden in plain sight, waiting in the archives for anyone willing to look. The ink may have faded, but the truth can never be completely erased. What do you think? Were there other women erased from the story? Let us know in the comments. Subscribe to the archives for more hidden history.